And tonight is the Holy Night, 8th day of the lunar cycle. So we've come together to meditate, chant paritas, to recollect the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. One of the ways we describe the Buddha, Lokavidu, knower of the worlds. Nowadays people would think knower of the world is somebody who's travelled a lot, visited many countries, knows all kinds of facts and information about different places in the world. But the Buddha was knower of the world because he understood the human mind. And he'd abandoned all ignorance, avijja, delusion, moha from his mind. So he truly knew the world. He'd abandoned craving and attachment and becoming that is the cause of suffering for a human being. He pointed out that we can't really know the world unless we know ourselves, our own mind. And to do that we have to train and practice. And so everything he taught was for that purpose. As monastics, he gave us the Vinaya training, the discipline, to help restrain our more unskillful tendencies, but also to cultivate positive tendencies, contentment, mindfulness, restraint, clear comprehension, all the qualities that support the practice of meditation and really deepening one's understanding of the mind. So the monastic training, the Vinaya, the practices, the regulations, they're not anything separate from that. And especially in the beginning of our practice, we need some guidelines and restraint. Otherwise, we're our own worst enemy. Because our starting point in the practice is a mind that is still under the influence of kilesa, avijja, ignorance, greed, anger, delusion. And it will come out in our speech, our actions, as well as our thinking. We may still have wrong views, misunderstandings. So to live as a Buddhist monk, you need Vinaya to help you. As you continue to practice, the Vinaya training becomes more obvious and more natural. And generally, one appreciates it as a support, as an aid to the training of the heart. And as we get used to the practice, we can look at things more deeply, investigate more deeply, and this is where we can remove the avijja, the ignorance, from our thinking and from our mind, from that conditioning process where ignorance is creating all kinds of trouble for us, proliferating the mind, creating moods of attraction and aversion, happiness and sadness. As we practice more, we have a chance to really get to know the mind and see it more closely. But you have to keep training, observing, watching, learning. The way of the world tends to be one of seeking distraction in pleasure, following views and opinions, absorbing into the sense realm. So we don't really know the world. We're constantly just reacting with pleasure and displeasure to the world. But when we turn around, turn our attention inwards, follow the Vinaya and start training in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then we're doing the opposite. We're bringing attention back to the body and mind in the present moment. And at first that's hard work because we're so used to seeking distraction, thinking about stuff, doing things, going here, going there. But if you reflect on what's gone before, you realize that it didn't bring you much happiness or contentment following greed, anger and delusion. It just brings you more confusion and suffering. Whereas the way of Dhamma Vinaya, however hard it may seem, brings you to peace and clarity. But as we're practicing and training, we need the patience and the effort to keep going with that. Many people say when they first come into the monastery, they lose whatever good meditation they had as a layperson. It's quite a common thing you hear people say. They say, when I was a layperson, I would go on a retreat and be so peaceful, come into the monastery and I can't do it anymore. I don't have that peace. That may or may not be true. Partly, when you meditate as a layperson, the contrast to whatever else you're doing is so strong. It seems like you're really peaceful when you meditate, because everything else is not peaceful. Whereas in the monastery, your lifestyle is already constantly bringing you towards peace, restraint, contentment on every level. So then the difference when you come to meditate, sitting or walking meditation, is not so much, it's not so defined, because you're already practicing. So we have to be careful, because as a layperson you tend to be seeking the highs, the bliss, the special experience of meditation, because it's such an unusual part of your life. It's more like seeking some kind of special high to keep you going through the lows of life. In a monastery it's different. It's more like learning how to keep a continuous effort in the practice and not concerning yourself so much about the highs and the lows, but more looking at whether you're mindful and have clear comprehension or not. You don't have to bother so much about how blissful you are or how special the experience you have in your meditation. It's more about whether you just know yourself or not. We call the Buddha the knower of the world because he knew the mind, he knew the levels of the mind, and then not only his own mind, he became so skilled he could know other people's mind. Whether they're following defilement or following the Dhamma, cultivating the path or off the path, going backwards or going in a different direction. He could know, as somebody who's developed the path to perfection, to Nibbana, will then easily be able to see if someone's not going towards Nibbana. Just like coming to the monastery, if you know the way to the monastery, once you know the route and where the monastery is. If someone's going in a different direction, it's pretty obvious. But the Buddha knew on every level of the mind, the most refined levels of the mind, rupa jhanas, arupa jhanas, the mind of Maggaphala Nibbana, but also the mind, the coarse mind, the mind of the lower realms, the hell realms, the mind of suffering. He knew that as well, because he had enough equanimity and wisdom to contemplate everything as it is. And this isn't necessarily some great psychic feat. It's just experience through the practice. Largely it's just wisdom gained through training oneself, and then one can understand how other people are training and how other beings are. Ajahn Chah used to say you don't need psychic powers to know who's peaceful in the monastery. You just watch how people walk around, what they're doing, what they're saying, and you'll know how peaceful they are. Because we practice on these three levels, body, speech, mind, and they're constantly reflecting the state of mind, whether the intentions are wholesome or unwholesome. In the beginning of practice, we often see unwholesome mind states as something really coarse and evil, like strong anger, strong greed or lust, or confusion, anxiety. But the more you practice, you realize even just momentarily losing mindfulness and clarity is also an unwholesome state of mind. Delusion comes in. It's not that you're doing anything evil, perhaps, you're just not fully aware. That's probably the most common kind of unwholesome mind state we experience. Sometimes we have extreme emotions, we get really angry or upset, we have real strong desire that we find difficult to control. But on a day-to-day level, perhaps the most common unwholesome mind state is just a loss of mindfulness, moha, delusion, the mind just proliferating about something, thinking about something. That's why the monastic training is so complete, because you're in a peaceful environment, you have the Vinaya, the discipline, and you have the meditation practice of the four foundations of mindfulness. You have fellow monastics to support you and give you a good example. It's a whole range of supportive factors that help you to become more mindful. They have more clear comprehension, they have more wisdom and insight. But still we have to be the one making the effort. No one can do it for us. But because we have these more frequent kind of mundane moments where we lose our mindfulness, it also means we can have many moments through the day when we gain a small victory of developing more mindfulness, bringing our attention back to the present moment, what we're saying, what we're doing, what we're thinking, being mindful of our activities, our posture, how we feel, what we're talking about. Every time we bring up mindfulness, we bring our attention back to the present moment, is a victory. We're gaining something on the path towards Nibbana. When you recognize greed coming up, any form of greed, desire, whether it's desire for food, or sexual desire, or desire for requisites, or desire for praise from other people, recognition from other people, attention from other people. The opposite of that is contentment. The more you practice, the more you realize, well, you don't need lots of material things to be happy, or you don't need the object of your sexual desire, you don't need all the different things that you think will make you happy, that stimulate your desire. You realize you don't need them, so more and more contentment arises. And then your greed has less power over the mind. You realize true happiness is bringing your mind to understand the Dhamma, to be mindful, reflective, see the impermanent nature of desire and the objects of desire. And then you're not such a slave to desire. You can say, it doesn't matter, I don't have to follow this desire, I can know it and let it go. Same with anger. When we're angry and we lose our mindfulness, the mind starts proliferating on something that's not happy about, something that's happened in our day, the words of another person, our own thinking about ourselves and what we're doing in life. When we get caught into aversion, then the proliferation comes. If we can establish mindfulness, we can just bring the mind back to the present moment, even when things go wrong or we experience some pain. Just bring the mind back to the present moment and experience some stillness. You can see that's the opposite of that mental proliferation of anger. So say you have pain in your legs, or pain from being tired or ill. You can know that with mindfulness, but your mind doesn't have to proliferate and think a lot about it. It can be still. If you're not still, you're not mindful, well, then you just start creating patterns of thought based on your aversion to the painful feeling. It's the same with other people. If they don't treat you the way you want to be treated, they don't give you enough recognition or respect or attention, then the mind starts proliferating again, creates conceit, attachment to views and self. But when you establish mindfulness, it becomes still. Stillness is the opposite of anger. Stillness cuts off the proliferation, even when you're facing something that's painful or unpleasant. You can be still with physical pain, you can be still with mental pain through the power of mindfulness. With delusion, in the long run, it's just allowing it to cease. What made the Buddha enlightened, he allowed avijja to cease. It ended. The cessation of suffering comes from the cessation of ignorance. So when you're caught into different kinds of mental proliferation, wrong views, just allow them to cease. When you establish mindfulness, you see those thoughts fade away, those moods and mental states fade away. What prolongs the delusion of the mind, the ignorance of the mind, is we believe in all these trains of thought. We keep trying to work things out, scheming, planning, creating stories, imagining. When you establish mindfulness, you can let all that just fade away, go to cessation. You're actually experiencing the cessation of suffering in your experience when you establish mindfulness. Because that's all it can do. Suffering, when known with mindfulness, just ceases, just ends. It's just a thought, an emotion arises, ceases. Even painful feelings cease. Lung Da Mahabua once said one of his practices he did, he just wanted to see how long painful feeling would last. And he said every painful feeling will arise and pass away until your mind clearly sees that, knows that. Then there's no more fear of pain, no more attachment, no more clinging to it, no more fear of death. So if you can establish mindfulness and allow all the mental proliferation just to quietly fade out, cease, you're no longer feeding delusion or ignorance. So living in the monastery, we have an opportunity to practice, but it's up to us to make use of that. Every day we get the kindness of the laity. They support us with the 4 requisites, give us food, clothing, accommodation. They allow the monastery to carry on working so that we can live here. So if that's helpful, you can use that as a motivation to give more back to the laity by putting effort into your practice. If you're feeling lazy, just remind yourself, I'm allowed to be here, I can be here because the lay people's generosity. Maybe that will give you the energy to put more effort into your sitting and walking meditation, learning chanting, reading and learning the Dhamma. Partly we do it for them, give something back so that their dana has more benefit, makes more good karma for them. Partly for our parents who gave birth to us, to our teachers, to the Buddha, to Ajahn Chah. When we reflect like this, it can really motivate you to do more good in whatever way you need to in your practice. To keep the precepts, if you're wavering in your precepts or keeping the Vinaya, learning the Vinaya, keeping it, you can keep it out of gratitude to the Buddha. He gave us this vehicle to practice. So the least we can do is follow the rules, follow the way of training. And everything he taught was coming from compassion and wisdom. He's only giving us methods and ways to understand our own mind so we can be free from suffering. So any suffering that comes up during the practice, it's not because of the Buddha. It's because of the kilesas, which are the very opposite of the Buddha. Because the way of practice that the Buddha gave us stirs up the kilesas, makes us go against them, makes them come up all the stronger sometimes. So you have to be very patient. You have to remind yourself, there's no one you can blame for this other than your own karma, that you've been born and dying many lifetimes and accumulated a lot of greed, anger and delusion. So you have to accept that for yourself. You can't blame the Buddha or the teacher or somebody else for that. That's another delusion. The more we get caught into the delusion of the mind, we'll think and think and think and end up blaming somebody. I'm suffering in my meditation because of this person or that person or this thing, that thing. That's just more delusion. Let it cease, let it end, and the mind will go back to stillness, peace. If you understand this point, then even when you face difficulty, you can be patient and just mindfully go through it until you're through that difficulty. It's like the lay people who planted the flowers around the Dhammacakka wheel at the front of the monastery. They came today and went and watered the flowers and had a look at them, and half of them had been eaten by the animals, as I predicted. They said, well, we made the good karma of planting them out of faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. We'll just have to accept that as our reward and accept that if we keep looking after them, some of them will probably survive. Some of them will get eaten by the animals. But they didn't let their mind get disturbed or disappointed. They didn't stick with disappointment, because it's just something that happens, isn't it? You can't control everything in life. Can't control the animals if they're going to eat the flowers, and nothing much we can do about that. If you let your mind dwell on it with delusion, you just create worry, anger, annoyance. Keep thinking about it, you just end up suffering. So everything is teaching us in the monastery. Everything is an opportunity to learn. Come back to your own mind, establish mindfulness, and let the proliferation fade out. Then you'll be more peaceful. So I'll leave that as an offering to you tonight on this half moon night.